Hi guys, starting the recording now. This is the Zoom review for the von Thunen model, the bid rent and the bid rent theory, and we're going to be going over some general, broad agricultural ideas. One thing about this week, this is pretty much the last week we have to review, and we have to do all of agriculture in this week. Now, granted, you guys did agriculture this semester, so you don't have to worry as much. You've also everybody did pretty well when it came to agriculture. So, I mean, there's things that you guys seem to have issues with, and that's what I'm trying to cover this week. One of the things that you guys had issue with in agriculture was the idea of the von Thunen model and the bid rent theory, and I just wanted to go over that today. Tomorrow we're going to be going over, and let me just double check this in case. All right. Let me get this open actually. There we go. All right. Sorry, guys. Tomorrow we're going to be going over scale of farming and commodity chains, and then Wednesday we're going to do women in agriculture. Thursday is going to be an entire agriculture unit review. So we're basically just going to be going over the stuff that's on the review module for the entire unit that you guys had access to before the test. We're going to be going over it. This one, there's going to be 2 Zoom reviews for it because of the fact that we're going over so much material, so it'll take longer. And basically that day, Thursday, it's just extra time to finish any assignments you haven't yet. And then Friday, which isn't published yet because I haven't finished the test completely for you yet, that's going to be a day where you just work on your final major grade for my class. Okay, so it's not up yet. It will be up by the end of the day. I will tell you guys when it is, but you can work on that. And basically, you're going to have 2 tries at it, but don't take your second try until I go in and grade your FRQ. And you guys can tell it takes me a long time to grade these FRQs, which is why I'm making your first major grade be so early, because we don't have an exam like for my class, right? You have the AP exam you should be studying for if you're going to be taking it, and that's going to be next week on Tuesday. But after the 8th, after this Friday, I'm giving you no new assignments until the end of the semester. Basically, we're going to use those 2 weeks to go over some of the important aspects of the course that we didn't get to. So this is like important stuff to understand urban centers and things like that. So you have that understanding going into your social studies classes in the future. So I still give you the information. You still have access to all that information, but it's not going to be as graded, right? Also, that's time for you to make up things you're missing, because I know a lot of you are missing things. So if we go to this right here and I go to my share screen, all right. So like I was saying, today we're just going to go over von Thunen model, bid rent theory. We're reviewing that, and then there's going to be a study resources discussion where you guys can share resources that you have found or you've made to help other students study, and then get some from other students to check out and study. Tomorrow we're doing the AP exam demo. So basically using that demo, you will be seeing what it's like to take the AP exam. Make sure you do this on the actual computer you're going to be taking the exam. Okay, so checking out this AP exam demo, seeing what it's like. It's really important that you use the computer you're going to use. If you're going to use a phone, use the phone. If you're going to be trying to write it out and then take a picture of your writing and send it in, that's possible. You can do that, but the issue with that is I don't know how well that'll work. But if you want to see what that'll be like on the demo day, on the day, you can check that out. All right, and then that's Tuesday. Wednesday is women in agriculture and gender inequality. We'll talk about that a lot. Basically, it's a very broad topic that touches on a lot of things in the course. So I want to give it some more time. And then Thursdays, our entire agriculture unit review, which I don't think I'm going to have you guys do anything. It's just hey, prep for the fact that you have the next day you should be working on your final major grade for the class, and then studying for the AP exam if you're taking it. All right. All right. So, and then this major grade, I'm going to be opening up for you. But main thing we're going into today is the von Thunen's model and Bitteren theory, which I think I opened over here. Yeah. So, thing that I did cover the first time we went over this, and I think I'd like to do it again just because it's great to know the idea of intensive agriculture versus extensive. Okay, so intensive is where you have a high amount of labor, capital, fertilizer, input relative to the land use. So that would be like, hey, I only have an acre to farm on, but I'm going to put like a bunch of my time, money, and a bunch of like fertilizer, pesticide, things like that. I'm putting a huge amount of work and effort into growing on this 1 acre. All right. A real world example of this would be cattle and stockyards. So having a lot of livestock, right? Like a huge herd of cattle in a very small area would be very intensive agriculture. Okay. And then we have extensive, where you basically are not putting in nearly as much labor, capital, or fertilizer into the land. Okay, so you're not really worrying as much about the land itself. You've got a crop that can either, like in the case of cattle, it's able to range over the entire land and take what it needs from the land. Basically, as long as you have the land there and there isn't terrible environmental things happening, your crop, your product that you are creating can range the land freely and live their best life and grow big and strong and happy, and you can sell them for a lot of money, right? Or it's where you still have, you're still putting in labor, you're still putting in capital, you're still putting in fertilizer, right? But your whole agricultural system is so large that the actual amount you put in, like per square foot, the amount of money you're putting in per square foot is very, very small. So that would be like large scale wheat farms. So wheat farms can be, acres and acres and acres and just completely massive, dominate an entire landscape and all that. But here's the thing. While they have to have a tractor, which takes a lot of capital, right? Because remember, capital is money in these ventures, all right? Or, maybe you spray with fertilizer a few times, right? And you're going to have to fertilize that land. At the same time, the actual amount of money that's going into each square foot of land that is growing wheat is very, very, very small. Right? It's a very small amount of money, all right? And a very small amount of labor, because usually like a huge wheat farm, it could potentially be, be worked by just a few people, right? Maybe 3 or 4 people. But if you have a huge livestock yard with like hundreds and hundreds of cattle, each one of those cattle has to be looked after by a person essentially, and fed by a person, and checked on by a person and all that. And you're going to have to build that small area where we're keeping a large amount of cattle up. So you're constantly putting a lot of work in with intensive agriculture. Extensive, you're using you're letting kind of the land do the work for you. All right. So that's just something I wanted to remind you guys. Today, we're looking at the von Thunen model. Von Thunen model was created by German farmer and amateur economist J.H. von Thunen. Right, it was early 1800s. He owned a lot of land, and he liked to look at economic systems. He was trying to figure out how he could make his land the most profitable. All right, and he determined the type of agriculture he needed to do was determined by the distance from a central market location. So remember, early 1800s, all right, early 1800s, it's really all about like cart and wagon and things like that. Basically, horsepower is literally how many horses he had pulling his stuff. So how fast he can get his goods from his farm to the market was mostly determined by the distance from the market, right? The further away he is, the longer it takes. The closer he is, the shorter it takes, okay? Oh, sorry. His model was created before industrialization, which I just explained. Basically, he didn't have railroads to work with. He didn't have all that stuff, which railroads and things like that, basically, once it became cheaper to move things further distances or faster to move things far distances, it completely changed this model. But it's still good to understand because it gets us into this idea, like von Thunen's really gets us into that difference between intensive and extensive and why they matter. Okay, so let's go. The von Thunen is an excellent model, or is an excellent illustration of the balance between land costs and transportation costs. As one gets closer to a city, the price of land increases. Okay, that's that bid rent theory. Basically, if we have cost here, and then we have distance to city, all right, distance to city. And they both start at 0, and as the cost goes up, right, or the miles increase, all right, they kind of go like this, where if you're in the city, here, I'm actually going to bring this down right now. Stopping the share, right? If you are in the city, right, so this is distance to city, 0 miles to the city, guess what? You're in the city, you're going to have a very high cost. Okay, but over time, as you get further and further away from the city, all right, once you're 10 miles out of the city, it's maybe half as much cost, right? But as you get 100 miles out of the city, it gets really low cost, okay? So that's why, if you guys have ever noticed that, hey, people who live in the city, they have way less land, right? They may only live in an apartment, or if they have a house, it's a very small yard. That's what's happening in the city. Well, once you get further and further and further away from the city, if you're in Katy, once you start heading to the southwest of Katy and you start getting to the more open rural areas, people have larger and larger yards, larger and larger areas that they are calling their home. Okay, so let me go back to string chair. We keep going with that. Right, that's that idea of bid rent theory. Okay, the farmers of the isolated state balance the cost of transportation, land, and profit. Essentially, they have to figure out which is most important to bring low. Okay, cost of transportation, which involves the distance they have to transport and how heavy something is. Because, hey, if I'm being paid to transport wheat, I'm not going to have to worry about my wagon breaking. But if I'm being transported, or if I'm being paid to transport wood, wood might break my wagon because it's so heavy, right? You have to be able to balance the idea of how much it costs to move your stuff, how much the land costs, because the amount of land you have helps determine how much you can actually grow and get from the land, and then also how much the things you're wanting to sell are worth, right? So this is also going to lead us to trying to produce the most cost-effective product for the market, all right? The sad thing is, in the real world, things don't happen as they would in a model because of the fact that there's things like river, and rivers change cost of transportation, cost of land, and profit of different things, right? If you're having to cross a river, that's going to increase your transportation costs, right? Because you have to pay for a bridge. You have to either build a bridge, help pay for a bridge, build a bridge, or you're going to have to pay someone who owns a bridge to cross your bridge, or you're going to have to pay somebody who has a boat or buy your own boat to get across that river. So there's things in the way that constantly make it, that can constantly make it more costly to transport things. Also, land. Hey, you know what? There's a lot of land in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. It's flat. That's all it is. It's flat grassland. All right. There's also a lot of land in Colorado in the mountains. All right. Here's the thing. The land in the mountains is going to cost more than the flat land in Kansas because the mountains are pretty. Aspects of the land can influence how much the land costs. All right. Also, when it comes to profit, how much profit you can make on things is definitely influenced by the culture you're in. All right. Fruits and vegetables matter more in India, where many people are vegetarian or vegan. All right. But fruits and vegetables are less profitable in places like Western Europe and America because so many people eat meat, okay? In the real world, things don't happen like a model, all right? So we see here, this is the bid rent theory. We kind of talked about it, right? Basically, the closer you are to the city, the more expensive the land. That is why agricultural activities that need more space, things like growing grain, raising livestock, are going to be much further from the center of the city, all right? So, let's see here. If we have the von Thunen model right here, in this green area is the city itself, all right? You're going to have the thing that goes bad first right around it, which is going to be dairy. And here's the thing. The reason why dairy went bad is because they didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have any way to keep it cold. So milk taken from the cow would go bad usually by the next day or the day after. Okay? So there was no point in trying to have your dairy be really far away from your city because that'll increase the likelihood that when you're moving that dairy from far away, it goes bad before it ever gets to the city. You want that dairy to be really close by. Also, if you guys haven't ever tried to move like large amounts of liquid, they're heavy, okay? Then, that's, I should say, intensive farming as well. That would be dairy, and then also intensive. So these would be crops that take a lot of work, all right? These would be crops that you don't just kind of let them do what they want. You have to tend to them constantly. You have to make sure that they're getting what they need, all that. So like, for example, intensive things in the olden days would be like grapes for wine, something like that, because that intensive farming, okay, you need something that's going to make you a lot of profit. Wine can make someone a lot of profit, so you can afford the land near the city. Also, you need a lot of workers to work on your wine, to work on your vineyard, all right? So you need people to set up your grapes, right? Because you have to have them growing a special way along a terrace, right? You have to have people to pick the grapes. You have to have all sorts of things happening, all right? And then right after that, okay, which real quick, let me pause this super fast. All right, stop share. All right, so you got intensive farming, dairying, right? Things that you need a lot of people for, you need a lot of wealth and capital for. That's going to happen close to the city, all right? And then after that, you get forest, all right? And here's the thing, back in the olden days, right? The wood that you would build your city from would come from the forest that was around your city, right? So you would need a ring of forest essentially for your city to function. So they could have, the wood they needed to burn. So they could have the building materials they needed. But at the same time, it's about transportation costs, because that forest, you got to cut down those trees, you got to move them on wagons. It's going to be very difficult. All right, they didn't have 18-wheelers back in the old day. They didn't have trains to move very heavy, large trees easily. All right, so they kept their forest close to them. All right, and then after that, you get grains. Because here's the thing, you need a lot of land to grow grains, because the amount of actual wheat that you get from like a little bit of soil this big, right? You only get like a little bit of wheat, all right? And if you're only getting a little bit, you have to grow a huge amount of land, have it set up to grow wheat, okay? And wheat's pretty light, pretty easy to travel with. So they could have it be further away. Also, if you need a lot of land, bid rent theory is coming into play. You need to get to where your cost for your land goes down. So the third ring right here is going to be extensive field crops. All right. And finally, the last one is going to be ranching. All right. If you have cattle, things like that, cattle, sheep, they need a lot of land to kind of go over and eat grass, all right? They eat grasses, they eat wild crops and things like that, which is great. Hey, that's super cheap for you. But at the same time, you need a lot of land to feed them the grasses. But as far as transportation costs go, in the olden days, they just walked them to market. You walked them in from where you were ranching. Maybe it took a couple days or even a couple weeks, but you got them there. You didn't have to put those cattle on a wagon or on a train or anything. You just walked them to market. So the transportation cost was very low. So that's why each of these rings was so consistent as he moved across Europe, okay? Or as he moved across Germany, I should say. All right? So dairying and intensive farming occur in the ring closest to the cities. Since vegetables, fruit, milk, and other dairy products must get to market quickly, they would be produced close to the city in the milk shed area. Remember, we don't have refrigerated ox carts, all right? That's that red area. And then timber and firewood would be produced for fuel and building materials in the second zone, all right? Before industrialization and coal power, wood was very important fuel for heating and cooking. Wood is also very heavy and difficult to transport, so it's located as close to the city as possible. Now, guys, you might be thinking, wait, but like, why would they worry about the production costs of wood if they can just go to a forest that's growing it and take it, right? Well, the thing is that back in the olden days, that area of the lumber that you would get the lumber from around your city, it was actually tended to by people, all right? There were people who would go in and cut down all of like the shrubs and the tall grasses and all that stuff to where it was easier to move through the cities, all right? And then there's also this thing called, I believe it's called picketing, where basically they can cut trees in a certain way that when their branches grow off, they grow in very straight rods, which makes it really easy to cut that rod down, cut it down to pieces that you need, all that stuff. So there's a bunch of labor that went into it, okay? So they wouldn't be saving money by just taking trees from further away, right? Transportation costs would be too high, labor costs would be too high. All right, and then we have extensive fields, all right, such as grains or bread. Since grains last longer than dairy products and are much lighter than fuel, reducing transport costs, they can be located further from the city. All right, that's what I forgot to mention. Grains last longer than like blueberries. They last longer than milk. All right, so they can be further away. And then ranching is the final ring surrounding, the central city. Animals can be raised far from the city because they are self-transporting. Animals can walk to the central city for sale or for butchering, all right? Beyond the fourth ring lies the unoccupied wilderness. And guys, the hinterland, right? That has been changed with industrialization, but in the olden days, right, you would really only see types of agriculture directly around population centers. As you move between population centers, there would just be open country, open wilderness, all right? Have you guys ever seen Beauty and the Beast? You know how Belle, she goes in the wilderness, she goes into the woods, and then like that's when she's attacked by wolves, right? That was the hinterland, that area of unoccupied wilderness. Now, nowhere in France is actually like that because pretty much there's cities and towns all across France, right? So von Thunen's model, whoops, let me move that, come on. Von Thunen's model is based on the same limiting assumptions. So these are things that basically he was going off of to make sure that his model was accurate, right? And then when you bring in real world factors, things will change. He believed that the city was centrally located within an isolated state. It's self-sufficient and has no external influences, right? There's no other cities nearby where they can raise more cattle for cheaper, right? There's no other cities nearby where people make really amazing blueberries that are the best, and people will deal with high transportation costs to get them from that city. There's no external influences going on, all right? The isolated state is surrounded by an unoccupied wilderness. Big thing with that, unoccupied, okay? In Europe, even in Germany at this time, right, there really was no truly unoccupied wilderness. It was just sparsely occupied, all right? And then the land of the state is completely flat, has no rivers or mountains to interrupt the terrain. Basically, completely flat plain, super easy to understand that the distance between one point and one point is just the distance. There's no mountain making it harder. There's no rivers making it more difficult. All right. The soil quality and climate are consistent throughout the state, which, guys, we see is not the case. All right. You can find clay better in certain locations than you can find sand, right? You can find really, really dark, rich soil in certain locations much easier than you can find it in other locations. But according to this, all soil, all land features are exactly the same and consistent excuse me, throughout the area, okay? Farmers in the isolated states transport their own goods to market via ox cart across land directly to the city. There are no roads. Basically made it to where there's no ideas of, oh, so as long as you are along this road, it would be easier to get to market than if you're 10 miles off of the road. In this one, it's basically there are no roads to mess up the fact that he has a nice, perfect circle going on. He wants that nice, perfect circle. Because if I decide to put in a road here, right, all of these circles will change their shape because it changes how quickly you can move to market, right? So dairying and intensive agriculture would go further out, right? Grains would go further out along the road, all right? Or sorry, forests would go further out along the road. Grains would be pulled along the road as well, because essentially that road acts to speed up transportation, allowing those parts of the agricultural system to get to the city faster, lowering transportation costs, basically distorting. You can see the distortion going on with that circle. All right. Farmers act to maximize profits. Essentially, farmers, just like everybody else in a capitalist system, are going to be greedy. They're going to want the most amount of profits possible. Right? I think that's it. So, guys, hopefully this gets you, right? Roads would affect these things, okay? If there were mountains, they could affect these things. Basically, von Thunen's model, because it's purely a model, is done on an isometric plane, all right? The whole plane, the whole place where they're looking at this model, completely flat, completely the same, completely the exact same climate throughout the whole thing, all right? And then bid rent theory is simply the idea that cost goes up as the distance to the city is lower, okay? So if you're 0 miles to the city, you're in the city, it's going to be the most expensive in the region, all right? The further you get from the city, the cheaper it is to own that land, okay? All right, so hope that helps you, right? This is something that I feel like everybody kind of had an issue with on the exam. It's what people consistently seem to mess up on. If you feel like you did a great job of it, I hope you prove that to me in the exam later, all right? But I'm gonna pause the video and get some questions in and then sign off.